All right, so here's the long awaited, much requested list of my top 10 favorite black metal bands slash albums. So, um, I want to begin with a couple of caveats. There are a lot of albums on this list that are kind of like bands that began as black metal and went off in their own direction. Uh, and so there's going to be some pure, true black metal bands on here as well. But a lot of these are very surrealist, kind of avant-garde sort of things. Certain bands that get counted as black metal, I've deliberately excluded. I will say that I absolutely love Opeth and I absolutely love Celtic Frost. But and to answer the inevitable question, Ghost Reveries and To Omega Therion are my favorite albums by them, respectively. And I actually saw Opeth live with Mastodon not too long ago. It was really good show. Anyway, but I absolutely love those bands, but it's like they're too far afield to get to really be called black metal or have any direct association with black metal. Um, Celtic Frost is very much its own thing. Celtic Frost has more in common with like sludge metal and that sort of thing than it does with black metal. The vocals really don't sound like black metal, and it's really very much its own thing. And I would the same for Opeth. Opeth has started out in like doing extreme progressive prog, extreme prog metal basically, and now they basically just do kind of this sort of gothic prog rock thing. So I don't think they really even have a direct connection to it anymore. And I don't even consider Venom, who are considered the ones who started black metal. They really don't sound like black metal either, and they've been pretty vocal. I think that they did not consider themselves black metal. They're forerunners of the genre, but that's about it. So, getting into it, just jump right into it. Number 10, The Covenant with the album Nexus Polaris. And so The Covenant, first of all, really beautiful, brilliant use of synthesizers and that kind of thing. Kind of techno-symphonic black metal, and just one of the most unique and diverse sounds. This was when I was reading a magazine called Progression Magazine, which is a quarterly magazine for progressive music. I don't know if it's even in print anymore. It may just be a website, but 20 years ago when I was finishing high school, going into college, Progression Magazine was my everything. This was the everything to me. I am a prog, as my viewers know, I'm a prog rock nerd from day one, from the word go. And so Progression was just the ultimate magazine for me. So I read it religiously, and I found out about actually a number of the bands on this list from Progression Magazine, including the band that's going to show up at number 1. But anyway, the number 10 band, Covenant Nexus Polaris. Yeah, so they were recommended to me in Progression Magazine, and just this album, Nexus Polaris, is really the only one that has a black metal sound to it. The rest of them are the rest of the albums that they did have like a Rammstein, Marilyn Manson vibe to it. And I hate to say, while I love Rammstein and Marilyn Manson, they did not pull it off very well, unfortunately. It was like a KMFDM type thing, and it's like they should have stuck to their guns. But they went in a huge different direction for all the rest of their albums, and they broke up eventually pretty quickly. Next one, And Oceans, Am God. So if you don't know these bands, And Oceans is the band, Am God, or it's stylized as AMGOD with periods, is the band. Is the album. Am God was another one that I found out about from I believe from Progression Magazine, and it's such a cool thing, man. This is talking about like the bringing like techno electronic elements into black metal. this album does that to like the next extreme, and it really gives me like a vibe of like if you've seen the movie The Lawnmower Man, like the virtual reality horror scenes from The Lawnmower Man, especially at the end. It puts me in that headspace. If you look at the album cover, you'll see why. They did a couple more records, broke up, and then they came back recently, and they've done a lot of really cool stuff. But yeah, it's one of those things where they took the black metal the structural framework of black metal and did kind of their own thing with it. So I'm going to from there I'm going to jump into some more true black metal bands, and I will say, by the way, I love Bathory, I love Immortal, I love Behemoth. Those are all great bands, but I wouldn't say I have like a favorite album by them, or they're like a thing that I really set down with. I love them when I hear them when they come on, but as far as like personal moments in my life, albums that I really was moved by, I haven't focused on them as much that way. But one band that everybody will agree on is Emperor. And I picked Anthems to Die Welkin at Dusk. There's a couple of other albums that I feel like a lot of bands do this thing where they write, it's kind of like what Metallica did with Load and Reload, where they write so many songs that they just have to split it up into multiple records. And I kind of feel like this is what happened to Emperor around this time. Like the stuff, now I'm blanking on I feel stupid because I'm blanking on the name of the album. The other album I was thinking of that came out right around this time from Emperor, but it feels like there's like a very specific period here where really those albums feel like one big album. But Anthems to Die Welkin at Dusk was the first Emperor album I ever heard, and so phenomenal album. Ihsahn is a very creative guitarist, and I love how I've read some of his columns in guitar magazines and stuff like that, and I know they've published, like, there have been like books published to analyze and explaining his guitar style and everything. And he has such he's one of those players to me like Alex Lifeson, where he's thinking about he's thinking about the entire acoustic space that the guitar needs to occupy. It's not just power chords. There's a larger devotion to really occupying the space, not just with more and more distortion, but with actual harmonic information in the guitar. So he has really beautiful voicings and everything within his stuff. So that one. Now, number 7, a lot of you are going to throw food at your screen when I say this, but I'm sorry. My favorite Darkthrone album really is Soulside Journey, and sadly, I don't like any of the rest of the Darkthrone albums. They've just never done anything for me. And yeah, that includes like the early albums that everybody's so gaga over. It just doesn't do anything for me. But Soulside Journey is really a very different album. It's more of a death metal album, more of a melodic death metal album before that had a name. And I think it's just the first one that's very atmospheric to me. It's got a lot of great grooves in it, a lot of great arrangements and writing. And so whenever I hear Darkthrone, it's that one record, and then everything else where they shifted into like, I hate to say it, but like competing with Varg and everything like that for the post-Mayhem, post-original Mayhem lineup, street cred up in Norway and everything. When they started competing for that, I just lost interest. I couldn't get into it. I guess it's one of those things where it's like, they're so by the numbers black metal that it's just not interesting. There's not going to be any curveballs. I'm doing this video the same night I did my previous video about grindcore, and it's one of those things where if you get to by the numbers about it, where I can literally predict what your next chord is going to be, it just loses. It stops being interesting, unless it's the blues. The blues, it will always be interesting, even though it's the same chord, always the same chords. But anyway, yeah, it's just stops being interesting. But Soulside Journey is a phenomenal record, and I recommend checking it out. Okay, so I had to do, carrying on my point I was making with Emperor and them having multiple albums from that kind of same time period. There's two albums that came out right after the other that I have to comment on here, which is Belus and Fallen by Burzum. Now, of course, the usual disclaimer, I do not endorse Varg's extremist political positions and all of that. He, in his own personal life, he seems to be very much a pompous asshole, and so I don't agree with that, certainly at all. But from a musical standpoint, and certainly admittedly from his musical contributions to the black metal sound, obviously I really wish the whole thing with Euronymous had not happened. It's unfortunate that we'll never know what else Euronymous would have contributed to black metal if it hadn't been for all of the shit with Varg and all of that. And I also appreciate Varg bringing my attention, shining a light on the conditions in Norwegian prisons. If you don't know about the conditions in Norwegian prisons, well, Norwegian prisons are so unbelievably nice, you will strongly be tempted to go there and commit murder. It's insane how nice the prisons are in Norway, and you might want to think look up Norwegian prison cells on Google. They look like college dorm rooms. It's insane. But the funny thing, the thing about it is, though, as comfortable as it is in Norwegian prisons, they have the lowest recidivism rate of any country, a crime recidivism rate of any country in the developed world. So, seems to be working. Anyway, but anyway, with Belus and Fallen, now what's interesting, the early Burzum albums obviously are sonically crap. In fact, if you've seen the documentary Until the Light Takes Us, if you've seen that documentary, there's a scene where Varg talks about how he recorded the vocals for the first Burzum recordings. He went in the studio and recorded the vocals into a pair of headphones that had been reverse engineered to serve as a vocal mic. And I do get tired with black metal of the true guys that are deliberately trying to sound as bad as possible. It's like, I want to hear your music. I want to enjoy your music. You do not need to record guitars that sound like a small animal scratching from the inside of a shoebox, And so it's funny with the early Burzum albums, if you take songs like Dunkelheit and that kind of thing, and play them on acoustic guitar, like a classical guitar, nylon guitar, a lot of the parts actually sound very nice. They sound like very nice classical guitar stuff. And so it's so interesting to me when you've got those really good ideas there that he would want to, diminish the enjoyment of them by recording them in such a horrible way. But anyway, when he got out of prison and he did these two albums, they were incredible. Now, I don't entirely understand how someone can be in prison for 17 years, come out and play guitar better than they did when they went in. But those two albums, again, feel like they have like a larger conceptual continuity to them. And it really is his best writing in my mind, his most mature writing, and his most his most melodic and his most intricate writing, especially on Fallen. Between the two, Fallen is my favorite, but the two of them kind of go together in my mind. So really great stuff, and just really a lot of really cool stuff happening harmonically with the guitars, and you can hear it finally. So great stuff there. Anyway, so moving on. Next, Gorgoroth. I'm not going to try to say the entire title of this album, but it starts with the word Quantos. Anyway, so one very important thing. Gaul is not Gorgoroth. He sang on less than half of the albums. He is a more pretentious asshole than Varg, if that's possible. But he's just this ridiculous pain-in-the-ass vocalist that I don't know why or how he got in the band, but granted, his major contribution was that he kept them gave them an additional layer of cultural relevance in the metal scene with all of his bizarre and frequently disturbing antics and everything, so on and off stage. But anyway, Quanto's a much later album in the Gorgoroth catalog, but really I love the production on it. The production is slick as hell, without sounding overproduced, pop, like pop levels of production, but it just fits perfectly. The guitar just kind of hits this just perfect zone, with the tone, and it just feels so right. The vocals, there's so much, black. If you are a connoisseur of black metal, you will know that there's actually an extraordinary degree of melodic content in the screaming if it's done properly. There's degrees of variation within the screaming, and that's true of death metal too, like with Corpse Grinder and that sort of thing. But there are melodic variations in the screaming and that sort of thing, and that really comes across in this record. It's such a stellar record, and frankly, it grooves, it rocks. I mean, it really does, and in a way that a lot of black metal goes more for the noise atmosphere kind of thing. This one straight up rocks. Going to another one that straight up rocks, the band that in my mind is like the AC/DC of black metal, Satyricon, and the album Now Diabolical. I first heard this band on a Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles sampler CD. The song King, or King, was blowing up big in Norway, and it was playing like the inner Sandman of black metal. I heard that groove, that awesome riff, this tight groove, the vocals, Iron Wing, Crooked Horn, and all of that, like just bangs. It just slams, and the whole record's like that. It's like a black metal power groove album. So it's just great when you want to, for like fun, engaging black metal. And then the next one, Cradle of Filth, Godspeed on the Devil's Thunder. Now, a lot of people I know would say this is one of those bands this is one of those bands that was only ever tangentially black metal. They're mainstream Hot Topic black metal and all of that, and I get that. I understand that. There's nothing true, spelled TR00, about Cradle of Filth. I get that, but I love Cradle of Filth, and I know that it's even less true of me to TR00 of me to like a later album like Godspeed on the Devil's Thunder, and the early stuff is great too, don't get me wrong, but this record, again, it's just such a satisfying listen. I love the poem that we hear recited at the beginning. I love the atmosphere of it. I love that this is really and truly a well-written album, and I honestly like that they did it with an eye towards pop success, because there's so much potential in the sound of black metal that the TR00 black metal bands won't take advantage of. And it's so nice to hear a band that really capitalizes on that. I mean, just the first song, Shat Out of Hell, it just kicks in, and it has this just unrelenting groove. I love the guitar work on this record, and I love Paul Allender's signature Paul Reed Smith guitars. If you've ever played them, they're great. But anyway, and then moving on to number 2, Agrypnie, Words That Go Unspoken, Deeds That Go Undone. So Agrypnie is another band that it's interesting. So if you don't know about Agrypnie, they are another band that's supposedly really and truly satanic, as opposed to the other bands that aren't really and truly satanic. All of that. I'm not too concerned about whatever their religious views are. I do like that they wear suits and ties on stage. I think that's a nice touch. But again, this is a band that, I know I said I was excluding bands like Opeth and everything, but it's Opeth is so far removed from black metal that it becomes its own thing. Somehow, it's hard to put a finger on it, but Agrypnie embraces all of the technique of prog metal and all of the pomp and circumstance of symphonic black metal and all of that. All of the experimentation and avant-garde all the avant-garde experimentation of Celtic Frost and Triptychon and all of that, but still feels fundamentally black metal, even though they are their own thing. And so I was strongly tempted to remove them or to not include them for that reason. But it's really such a cool sound, and there's so many. It's one of those bands where there's plenty of surprises along the way. I'm a huge fan of bands like everything from Steely Dan to The Residents and everything in between, where even Tom Waits, that kind of thing, where you don't know going into it fundamentally where you're going or what it's going to be. It's like I said about Bathory and Immortal and all that, where it's like those great bands, but I know what it's going to be, especially with Darkthrone and stuff like that. But it's this stuff veers more almost in the direction of like Devin Townsend and things like that. But it's such a dark, cool, intricate sound, and they're one of those bands that it's like they exploded onto the scene. They put out like 3 or 4 really good albums and disappeared. And then a few years ago, they came back. They just all of a sudden came back, put out one more album, and disappeared again. And I don't know what's going on with them, but they're a great band. Finally, my number one, and this is yet another one that is almost not on the list because it's so experimental it becomes its own thing. But I have to include it, and I'll explain why. That is Sigh, Imaginary Sonicscape. Sigh is one of my all-time favorite bands. Imaginary Sonicscape, I want you to be very clear about how much I love this album. This is my number 3 favorite album, period. Transcended only by Rush, Moving Pictures, and Dream Theater Scenes from a Memory. That's how much I love this album. My number 3 favorite album of all time, and even if I expanded that of all time out of just metal albums and into albums in general, it would probably still be in the top 5. And so incredible album. So again, another band I found out about from reading Progression magazine. In fact, while I was moving, I don't think I can put my hand on it, but while I was moving, I came across the issue of Imaginary Sonicscape from like 20 years ago, where they had this big feature story interviewing Mirai Kawashima and talking about this album when it had just come out. And if you don't know Sigh, if you are an extreme metal fan and you don't know Sigh, oh my God, you are missing out. So I'm a Japanophile anyway. I'm fascinated by Japanese culture, not just anime. I like anime, but just Japanese culture all across the board. And I love in the arts and humanities in Japan, when it comes to creating art, there is this automatic synthesis of disparate cultural ideas and norms and concepts and genres that just happens automatically, that doesn't happen here. If you think about, like, okay, in the mid to late 90s, we saw the emergence of all of these bands that were combining specifically rap and metal in the United States. And that became like the thing, rap and metal. Oh my God, these two genres got merged together. Here's all these bands. That kind of oh my God thing really doesn't exist in Japan. They don't think anything of combining genres like that the way we do. You know, here in America, we have this weird expectation that every genre of music is supposed to stay in its own little silo, and the powers that be periodically combine these two styles, one or two styles, to see what happens, but normally they stay separate. Not in Japan. In Japan, you get this wild, beautiful smorgasbord of just everything. And I got fascinated, I got fascinated by all of the kinds of movies that the music of Sigh, the Japanese movies that the music of Sigh goes perfectly with during that time period. I got into, Takashi Miike and Shinya Tsukamoto and Kiyoshi Kurosawa and all of the Japanese cyberpunk movies like Rubber's Lover and Pinocchio and all of that. Japanese cyberpunk is a genre that literally only consists of about 10 movies. The live action cyberpunk, not anime like Ghost in the Shell. But anyway, so you listen to Sigh And you will hear extreme metal blended perfectly with, extreme black metal blended perfectly with jazz and funk and fusion and trip hop and R&B and surf rock and ska and classical music and every other genre under the sun you can imagine. And here's the thing, like I was just talking about Agrypnie. Agrypnie will jump into other genres, do the kind of turn on a dime, look at the cool stuff we can do kind of thing. But it's like a jump from one genre to the next. We're going to jump into a fusion thing. We're going to jump into a 70s prog rock thing. We're going to jump into a swing kind of sounding thing. And then we'll jump back into black metal. It's always sectioned off that way. Sigh makes everything, all of these seemingly totally disparate genres happen together all at once. The first Sigh song I ever heard was No, it wasn't. The first Sigh song I ever heard, I can't think of it. It was the last track off of Scenario 4, the one where there's the choir going, da, 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 da. I heard that first, just off the internet, and then I got Imaginary Sonicescape. Corpse Cry Angel Fall came on, and I was just transfixed. Like, how is all of this stuff happening at the same time, and it all sits together perfectly? The production, you can hear everything. Now, I know they've had some albums where you can't hear everything, and Gallows Gallery which came next, was a perfect example of that, and they had to re-release it. Still a good album, but anyway. But all of these sounds, it's like everything's leveled and balanced perfectly, and I'm hearing these grooving, rocking, thrashy guitars, black metal vocals, and then there's like all this wild like hand percussion happening, like Dead Can Dance level hand percussion, and all kinds of like 70s Return to Forever fusion keyboards, and they're all just flying and swirling together. And I'm hearing this and I'm like, how is this possible? And to this day, this album fascinates me. And it's just incredible, the level of depth. I cannot do it justice just describing it. You have to go hear Imaginary Sonicescape to really appreciate everything that happens. A song like the Sunset Song, which to cover, and it has these like kind of Bill Frisell surf guitar sounding. It's insane. It's beyond insane, but it's beautiful and it's multi-layered and it all works. And it's just this weird thing. There's these bands out of Japan I just love, these experimental bands like the Boredoms and OOIOO and all of that. They're really weird stuff. And those bands are amazing. They do really cool experimental stuff. But Sigh takes it one step further, because it's like they make the experiment pay off. They don't just create something that's weird. They create something that's weird, but at the same time, it's taking all of those genres that they're pulling from and doing them extraordinarily well all at the same time. There is nothing like Sigh out there. And nothing else like Sigh out there. You have to go hear Imaginary Sonicescape. You will be, and it has to be one of those things where you sit down and listen to it on good speakers or good headphones or something like that, and just commit yourself to it, because it's the song cycle on there is extraordinary, is absolutely extraordinary. And the rest of the Sigh catalog is just as incredible. For some reason, Hail Horror Hail is not on streaming services and everything, which is frustrating and aggravating, and I hate that. But Imaginary Sonicescape is available. It's out there, and go listen to it. Like, what are you waiting for? Go hear one of the most incredible albums you will ever hear in the history of heavy metal. I cannot say enough good about it. So anyway, those are my top 10 favorite black metal bands and favorite albums by them. So, peace.